Okay, members, so we're now resuming our meeting at agenda item 7. So this is the RNID evidence session on the sign language bill. Members, papers for this agenda item start at page 625. And it would be helpful, members, if possible, when discussing the bill, if you refer to relevant clauses where that is the case. So I now like to welcome the following representatives to the meeting: Terry Devine, Morning. Association Director for Inclusion and Employment, and Mariette Mulvena, Development Manager. So you're both very welcome.
Thank you.
Very welcome this morning. And Terry, I invite you to make a brief opening statement before we move to questions from members. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'd like to thank the committee for inviting us along and giving us this opportunity this morning to give evidence, obviously, on the sign language bill. Introductions. As has been said, I'm Terry Devine, Associate Director for Inclusion and Employment at RNID. I have been there for over too many years, shall I say. Joined in 2001. And I'm also on the BSL Advisory Board at Westminster. And I'm a CODA, so I'm a child of deaf adults, so sign language was my first language. And I also have the unique perspective of working on all 4 sign language bills across the UK. So I was involved in the Scottish one initially. As you can tell from my accent, I'm Scottish. So I was involved in the Scottish one in 2015, and then the Westminster bill as well, and consequently on the BSL Advisory Board, currently working on the Wales one and the Northern Ireland one. So that's a brief introduction from me, and Mariette, if you can introduce yourself.
Good morning, everyone. As you already know, my name is Mariette Mulvena, and I am a development manager for RNID, and I have worked for RNID for an incredibly long time as well, just like Terry. I started in 2002, and I was educated in school in Dublin. Therefore, my first language is Irish Sign Language, and I now have bilingual sign languages using both BSL and ISL. And thank you so much for having us here today.
We would like to recognise the work that the deaf community in Northern Ireland have done in campaigning for this bill. It's really important to the whole community. And the role within the Department for Communication for Communities and the Minister for Communities for introducing the bill. So RNID, along other charities representing deaf sign language users, campaigned for, as I've said, the Scottish bill in 2015, the Westminster BSL Act in 2022. We're also supporting the Welsh bill and the Northern Irish bill, which we're hoping will be very successful. So RNID fully support the sign language bill for Northern Ireland and its goal to recognise sign languages in Northern Ireland and promote them. So that includes BSL and ISL in Northern Ireland. And Northern Ireland is uniquely lucky in that it is the only executive-led sign language devolved legislation. And it gives it the opportunity to go a lot further than other pieces of similar legislation in the UK, because the other ones have all been private member bills, so they can't quite have the same weight that the executive-led one does. So obligations put on the Department of Communities to promote the greater use and understanding of BSL, particularly making sign language classes available to deaf people, and that includes ISL, their families and carers, is a huge step forward ensuring better access to sign language. Furthermore, the accreditation scheme for interpreters and sign language tutors should help the executive better understand the workforce available to support deaf sign language users in Northern Ireland, and in turn address any shortages. And overall, we hope that the consultation with the deaf community outlined in this bill so far is extended into the implementation as well, to ensure that the needs of the deaf community in Northern Ireland are kept front of mind. So the community has to be front and centre in everything we do here.
Thank you. Thank you. And I have to say that's a great breadth of experience to bring to committee this morning, and very much welcome that. The committee has heard concerns that Clause 8 and its requirement to consult with at least one person or group is too limited. Your written submission expresses support for the clause as drafted. Is at least one person or group enough, especially if the same person or group is used frequently?
No.
Okay.
So as much as we've written yes, it's more about the fact that they're consulting with the community would be the yes, but as I've just said there, we would want it to be extended for full implementation, that they meet with, you know, every different part of the community as much as possible, where it's feasible to do that. You engage with, because deaf people are all different and they've all got different needs, and there's different levels within the community itself. So we would expect that there is consultation across.
Thank you. I think the fact that there's two sign languages involved in itself does indicate that. Your written submission does also cite alarming research from last year that found that 82% of deaf BSL users believe there's still a stigma towards deaf people and people with hearing loss, and 71% of BSL users believe that most people hold negative attitudes towards them. Can you give some examples, Terry, of how this manifests itself, and how do you believe that this is a key indicator for the future success of this bill?
So one of the things that you talk about in the bill is educating families with sign language, you know, that the families have it. One of the biggest barriers for deaf people is everyday life, is accessing information or accessing services wherever they go, whether they're going shopping, whether it's education. So it's about actual access to everything in everyday life. So that's about educating the general public as well. Because if people don't know how to approach a deaf person or how to communicate with them, there's an automatic barrier there, and we want to reduce those barriers and do an education process. So it's fantastic that the Department for Communities has said they will provide family sign language classes, which is brilliant because it's the only place in the UK that's doing that, and we feel that's really important. But it's about awareness raising for the general public so that deaf people can access services every day.
Okay. Thank you. Marietta, do you want to say anything in relation to that? Around it?
You're asking me to comment on that question, Chair? Sorry, apologies.
Yes, around stigma.
Certainly, yes. I have to agree with what Terry has just said, in that I'm a deaf person myself and I do face barriers on a daily basis. Those barriers are certainly linked to stigma. They can be very overcome with very basic deaf awareness within the general public, and I feel that that would make a massive difference. And we're talking about simple things like people adding gestures into their communication, and that can certainly make a difference in how people communicate and help the deaf community feel more included within the society. I can give you examples. For example, one of my children had to go to hospital. It was an emergency, and the doctor there had a level 1 in BSL, and they were using gestures to help reassure me. They signed their name, they told me their role, that they were the doctor, and that was really quite reassuring for me as a mum, to be in that setting rather than feeling quite lost with, you know, with your child in those extreme circumstances.
Thank you, and that's very useful. So the follow-up then to that is, will the bill address this, do you believe, and should that indicator be reported on as per clause 9, along with other prescribed indicators that you have mentioned in your submission?
Let me double check what we've said. Clause 9.
And I suppose while you're checking that, really what I'm asking is that something we should also consider as an actual indicator?
Yes. In
terms of success, to measure the bill's success?
Yes, I think so. I think if we actually prepare a report evaluating the impact of the bill, it should include that as an indicator. Yes, that, you know, the wider community, the deaf community actually feel more accepted within the wider community. I think that would be a real positive thing to try and measure.
Okay, thank you. So I'm coming to members now. I'm going first of all to Kelly. Go ahead, Kelly, please.
Can I go through some of the clauses? So the first one is clause 2, and that's about the promotion.
Yep.
While it talks about accreditation and learning for deaf children and their families, it doesn't talk any more about how promotion will happen. Has there been anything in any of the other devolved nations bills that have been very good at outlining what promotion by government looks like?
Right, okay, so Westminster, in terms of the promotion work that they do, the bill initially said that they would provide a report every 5 years. right, on what activity the different departments at Westminster are doing. The Minister agreed that actually they would do a report every year to say this is the activity, so that you could actually see the progression of what they were actually delivering in terms of British Sign Language at Westminster. In Scotland it's slightly different. They have sort of development plans for each of the local authorities. They all have responsibility every year to develop their own plans and say this is what we're going to do. And they get the deaf community to look at the plans. So there's some departments who haven't done it and it's raised with them to say you haven't done the plan yet. Whereas the departments that have done it, they'll look at the plans and say actually that's all right, that's good what you're doing. A lot of it comes down to budget as well in terms of what different departments can do, but there are ways that you can do that.
On the budget, I have a concern about clause 3 when it brings in affordability.
Yep.
Personally, I don't think putting affordability above inclusion is the way to do it. Do you think then that affordability is a reasonable excuse?
It depends. You need to be pragmatic about it. So I think that there's a journey to go on in terms of what services the deaf community use within Northern Ireland. And the ones that are used most often that can afford to do it is obviously the ones you want to put the pressure on to actually deliver those services. There may be smaller departments that don't have the budget to do it, but there's no demand on them from the community. So I think it's actually being pragmatic about it and saying, you know, is it about making that provision when you don't actually have the money there to do it? But there are ways around it where, as a central service, what you can do is establish like a VRS service that all the departments can use, and it's managed centrally. And that's what happens in Scotland. They've got their own VRS service that the community can use, and different departments within the government can use, or local authorities. Health use it. In fact, it's gone as to the stage that deaf people can use it to order a pizza, if that's what they want to do, because it's about full inclusion in life. So there are methods that you can put into place to support the affordability element of it.
Just on that, clause 5 talks about reasonable steps, but they're not listed in this bill. It would come in regulations later.
Yep.
Do you think, therefore, it would be more appropriate to sort of start to point out those that are considered as unreasonable? Going to an accident emergency department, you should expect to have someone there who has a level of sign language. Going to a dentist, going to, are there certain activities in life that we would say there's a piece of legislation now, you cannot use the affordability because it's written down and you have to have taken reasonable steps, but there are some areas that are no-go. You have to do. Yes. You have to provide interpretation.
Yes, absolutely. We would very much consider health as one of the key areas that you have to provide interpreters, and they have to be suitably qualified interpreters. Legal is another area that you have to have appropriate level interpreters that have the CPD and have the qualifications. Health in particular is key, where somebody's life is at risk and they want to make sure they're getting the right information around medication or anything like that, and being told, rather than have, which has happened in the past, people have brought their children in and the child has had to interpret for the parents and say, your mum's got cancer, which is completely inappropriate. So it does have to be, and I was told of an example last week of someone who had gone to the hospital, had an interpreter, and the interpreter was a trainee interpreter, and she said, the jargon's too much for me. She says, I should not have taken this. So it's really important that you have a qualified interpreter to do the work.
And that's one of the things in clause 2 about the accreditation. There is no defined accreditation in the bill. I wouldn't expect there to be, because that could change, but that's to come forward by regulation.
Yep.
How vital is it therefore that the community are involved with setting what acceptable accreditation is?
It's really important, particularly in Northern Ireland, because you have the two sign languages, and the qualifications for ISL are quite different from the qualifications for BSL. So it's important that you have accreditation that you accept from both, because there's interpreters travel up from the south to support people in the north. So having accreditation that recognises both, so the community can tell you which ones are really important to them.
Finally, just on this accreditation, if we are committing to providing sign language classes for people who are surrounding children, in order to get the accreditation and training out to the wider public, especially for adults who have acquired hearing loss later in life, my worry is that in order to teach, you have to have a teaching qualification and a sign language qualification, when actually the sign language qualification is the key thing, because it's the language. How do you think that this bill will help that, or is it very unclear?
I think it's important that you have both the teaching qualification and the sign language qualification. Just because you can sign doesn't mean you can teach, and there's frameworks around teaching. It doesn't have to be like a school teacher's qualification. There are tutor teaching qualifications that are slightly different, that allows deaf BSL users to go in and teach sign language. So I think it's important that they have those qualifications, because it ensures that the learning of the student is appropriate and suitable for the future. So there are unfortunately quite a lot of cowboys, as we would say, that go out and teach, BSL and ISL, who aren't qualified to teach. So people are paying for a service that they're not getting the same quality of training.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. And I'm wondering, just in general terms, is it better, in your opinion, that across key services that a wide range of staff have some awareness, or that within those services that there are people who are specialised in the role and able to be drawn upon?
Right, okay. Both. Absolutely both. We would say anybody that works on the front line should have a level of deaf awareness. But if you have a service that provides a specialist service for deaf people, particularly sign language users, there should be somebody there that has a level of qualification. If they don't have that level of qualification, it's about having a framework in place where they can bring in suitably qualified interpreters to do the job for them, and making sure that it's timely as well. So if somebody is going for an appointment, it's not that they have to wait 2 weeks to get an interpreter. So there needs to be a framework in place to be able to book interpreters, which is why I was suggesting a sort of central system where you could book interpreters to bring in.
Thank you. Is a complaints procedure an important part of legislation like this,
Absolutely.
in your opinion?
Yes. One of the things that we find within the deaf community is that they don't complain. And the reason they don't complain is because it is so difficult for them to do that. There is no process in place. So if you take the current green paper at Westminster around pathways to work, they've translated the whole green paper, but they don't have a process in place that a deaf person can sign back the response. It has to be in written format, which is completely inappropriate. So it's thinking about things like that. What would you do to make sure that deaf people have full access?
And the final one from me, and thank you for your assistance so far, it's been really useful. Clause 7 refers to the Department may making regulations. It says regulations under this chapter may modify any statutory provision. In your opinion, is may strong enough in that sense, or should we be considering the use of must or some other form of words?
May. I think you need to give yourself some space that regulation might change in the future. So things change, nothing stays constant, and you need to give yourself that space. So saying must sort of restricts you a bit more, I think, whereas saying may will allow you to have that change.
Okay, thank you. Can I check if there's any other questions, members? Brian, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. And yeah, a lot of the legislation we receive is enabling legislation, and it provides that it can be strengthened over time. So we often have that debate about may or must, that at least it's providing the means for it to happen. A previous, I'll refer to Clause 2, promotion of interests, and in Part 2 of that clause on the greater use and understanding of sign language, BSL, ISL. A previous witness said to us about situation in which sometimes deaf children and their families are encouraged at an early stage not to learn sign language with the intention that it might discourage the child learning lip reading and in an intention to support development of their spoken language, I think, is the context. But actually that discourages then the child from learning sign language, which ultimately will be their first language. And there should not be a presumption against sign language at an early stage, and that actually should be prohibited, because it's they describe that as language deprivation for the child in their first language if that early access and encouragement of sign language is not being provided. Would you have, either of you have a view on that, or would you be aware of examples of language deprivation through the not early enough provision of sign language?
So we always advocate for total communication when it comes to children. Give them every tool in the box so that they can learn and improve their education opportunities. So you give them sign language, you give them speech, if it's speech therapy or whatever, and then as they get older they can decide for themselves which way they want to go, whether they want to use sign language and be part of that community or whether they want to be oral. But it's about giving a child every possible tool in the box and not depriving them, so they have access to language altogether. And if you look at education attainment rates, deaf children, particularly cochlear implant wearers, are assumed to be able to hear when they're in a classroom, and they miss out quite a lot. They have deaf fatigue, things like that. So the attainment rates are actually lower for deaf children when they're leaving school. Children who have sign language and get the appropriate support in school actually do better at attainment with the appropriate support. So it's as I say, it's about giving them every tool in the box and making sure. So if they do have cochlear implants and have sign language, it gives them that extra communication skill. I don't know, Mariette, do you agree?
Yes, I do agree. And the reason for that is, obviously, when I grew up, my parents were encouraged not to use sign language. They were told that wouldn't be worth it. But if you look back, in my own life, I think that the barriers that created, and those other children that aren't learning sign language at a young age, their reading age post-16 is coming out at roughly around 10 years old, which really isn't enough. The evidence speaks for itself and the importance of learning sign language at a young age.
Yeah, we will look at, is there somewhere in the text, that we can insert wording, I think, to make that point.
Right, I can certainly take that away and give you something written.
I know if you had a view on that too.
Yeah.
Because at this stage, our role is to ensure that the text of the Act is appropriate, at an early stage, at this stage.
Yep. Yeah, I can certainly take it away, have a look at the text, and then do a written submission, if that's agreeable.
Okay, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Kelly.
Just finally, compared to the other pieces of legislation, is there anything not included here that was a really good thing elsewhere that we could maybe consider?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I'm very impressed with the Northern Ireland legislation, to be honest. Having looked at the other ones, the support that's given to children and families is absolutely amazing, because it doesn't happen elsewhere, and it's really important. The fact that you're looking at training more interpreters and training more tutors of sign language is really important too. That doesn't happen elsewhere. They don't have frameworks elsewhere to do that, which is where the executive have that extra weight. Because it was private members' bills, there was no money behind it to support them to do anything like that. So, and I know that you are looking at the VRS system in Scotland as well, which it was the one good thing that really did come out in Scotland, was the provision of that VRS service. So yeah, I think the bill that you've got here is actually very comprehensive in comparison to the other ones.
Right, could I just check, Mariette, do you wish to add anything to Terry's comments?
No, that's fine, thank you.
Okay. Okay, well listen, thank you Terry and thank you Mariette. That has been really useful information for us at this stage of committee stage, so thank you for your attendance today.
Thank you for your time.
Bye.
Thank you.
Okay, members, just check, so we're going to get some further written evidence from the group, which is useful. Any other actions members want to note at this stage before we move on to the other session? So we will now need to allow time for interpreters to leave to set up for live broadcasting, interpreting the next session. So I therefore propose a further suspension of a few minutes before we move to the next evidence session. So would members be agreed we take a further 5-minute break? Members agreed. Thank you. Okay, Clerk, please take us out of broadcast.